going on, everybody? With the Steelers already out of the playoffs, we are in full offseason mode over here. Starting today, my good friend Nick Martin's going to be joining me every Monday to talk some NFL draft, something I'm really excited about. For a lot of the OG supporters, a lot of you guys have been around a while for the channel. Y'all probably recall me and Nick doing an NFL draft podcast together when we were both with All Steelers. One of my favorite people to talk about prospects. So we're really excited to bring this back, talk some ball with you guys. First things first, Nick, how we doing, brother?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good, man. You talked to me about bringing the podcast back together, and I was so fired up because this was always my favorite part about doing the draft that year. I remember talking about guys like George Pickens and stuff like that with you, and how much we wanted a guy like that. And now it's kind of interesting thinking back on Pickens now and
Yeah.
how and the dynamic there. So I'm really curious to see some players that we're gonna be like they're on up here versus down here, and
Yep.
how our takes will age from now. So I'm always fired up to just talk about the draft.
For sure. Yeah, it's always cool too, because getting feedback from people about hey, I watched this player because you guys talked about him on the podcast, or hey, just being able to interact with questions and shine a spotlight kind of on some of these players that maybe some people that don't pay attention as much to the draft year round, they can kind of get an early head start on. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here today. Today's video is just going to go over the Steelers, top 5 draft needs. So Nick and I compiled separate lists. We'll kind of compare and talk about those position groups. But we've also kind of chosen one specific prospect to help kind of fill those voids for the roster. So this will give us a chance to, share our scouting notes on some of our favorite players that we've watched so far. And hopefully give you guys some helpful insight as you guys start, your process together as well. Just before we jump into this, before we get started, if you guys could just like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Also, if you guys have NFL draft related questions or Steelers related questions for Nick or myself, you guys can hit us on Twitter. Obviously, links in the banner below, but you all can also leave those comments below, and we'll try to get to those. Those are the best ways to kind of interact with us, but I appreciate the support. Nick, I'm going to let you go first, man, since you're the guest. You start us off. What's your 5th ranked need for the Steelers as of today?
I really think it's interior defensive linemen. I think back to the days of when Aaron Smith and Brett Kiesel were still in Pittsburgh. They drafted Ziggy Hood, and then they drafted Cam Hayward. Obviously, Hood didn't end up being a long-term solution. And I really think this interior defensive line class, there's some guys at the top that are really caught my eye, and I think we kind of both have the same opinion. I think Steelers Nation has kind of zeroed in on this guy quite a bit. Derek Harmon out of Oregon. He dropped 15 pounds of weight, and he looked way more explosive and quick than he ever had at Michigan State. The way he was just winning with quickness off the snap, you could see him with the club swim combos. He was consistently just getting over offensive linemen. But not just that, something I was really impressed with was sometimes he had some really good flashes of pad level in terms of being able to 2-gap as an interior defensive lineman. And that's something the Steelers look for so much with their guys. They like guys who can not only rush the passer, but they can 2-gap and be able to hold their own at the point of attack. And there are instances where I watch Harmon. There are some plays where he's able to use a one-arm technique, still hold through the double team, and stay at the line of scrimmage. He doesn't get pushed off of it. I always think that's really impressive. He's got the length that you look for in your classic Steelers type of defensive lineman. You watch him with his hands, he's got some violence behind those hands in terms of how he wins.
Definitely.
And I watch the bull rush. His bull rush, he likes to win a lot off the bull rush with his bull and swim combo. He definitely likes to string moves together. It's definitely coming along for him, and I think he's an ascending prospect in this year's class. Somewhere, in that mid-teens to late 20 or to early 20s is where I think he could probably end up going right now. I think he went 16th in Dane Brugler's mock draft in The Athletic. He currently ranks third for interior defensive linemen in pass rush win rate with, I believe it was like 17.6.
Good numbers.
Yeah. And he was the only guy in the top 3 with like over 300. So I mean, like
Right.
349 pass rush snaps, and you're winning about 17% of the time. That's pretty dang impressive for a guy his size. So he's someone I am zeroed in on, and I'm really a fan of what I've seen of him.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were talking about Harmon, and I told you right before we jumped on because we didn't share our lists previously. We wanted to kind of keep things separate, but he and I have talked about Harmon quite a bit, just in DMs and things like that. I got to his film about a month ago. I've mentioned Harmon a little bit, like in some Q&A stuff that I've done on the channel. I've been really impressed with his game. Just some like my notes on him. Like obviously, you mentioned the 15 pounds lighter thing. It really showed up on film this year at Oregon. This dude was in the backfield on a consistent basis. I mean, there was times, stretches in games where it felt like it was dang near every play. 2024, you mentioned the high pass rush win rate. He had a career high 55 pressures. That was more than double what he had the year prior. Just a lot more consistent in his production. The explosive first step is really like one of the things that jumped off the film instantly with him. It's exactly what you want in terms of like you want a penetrating 3 technique that can get up the field, cross the face of offensive linemen, get on their edge in an instant. This is what Harmon could do for you pretty much from day one because I love the athletic profile. You mentioned the length, but he has the athleticism to make plays away from his gap in the run game. That's something I like. He also like utilizes length well against the run. When his pad level is good, he can stack and shed guys. He does a good job keeping his eyes on the ball carrier too. Like he'll consistently fall back into gaps. He recognizes blocks at a pretty high level as well. He's not somebody that's going to, I think there's been some people that think he's maybe a little bit more like position versatile. I don't necessarily think you're drafting this dude to play anything other than like, that 3 technique 2-eye, but he can like command and anchor in against double teams. That's something that I do like. There's some instances of him like dropping the anchor down and holding the point of attack, which, is really good. That's something I think the Steelers specifically have been missing a little bit against some of these power teams that like to run the football on them. The only thing that I worry about with Harmon, man, is that I just think he's a kind of a linear player and he's a little bit tight-hipped. And I think it shows up when he's kind of asked to change his path like last second. A lot of pressures, but only like 7 quarterback hits. And like there were just so many times where like he would get into the backfield and the quarterback would just kind of hitch up away from him. And I'm just like, man, I wish you were just a little bit more flexible, a little bit more bendy. To kind of change directions and change paths to get to the quarterbacks. Because like he is incredibly disruptive, but like he left so many plays on the field. He also had like a 25% or 26% missed tackle rate. So like there were times where like he was getting his hands on guys and just wasn't bringing them down. And I don't necessarily think that's like a referendum of what he's going to be in the pros for sure. But he's incredibly disruptive and someone that I think has a lot of value from day one and like a pretty high ceiling, especially like if he starts finishing at the level that I would like to see him finish at, this could be like a potential like impact level player. He's a round 1 guy all day in my eyes, has been. I think he's a top 20 player for sure in this class and someone that I think the Steelers should look at as like a potential like Cam Hayward, successor. So I had mine kind of split up 5A, 5B. I went with I ended up giving the edge to interior defensive line, so we're on the same page there. I'll go to kind of my number 4 need, which is probably going to be a name that I don't think we've talked about a ton. You and I hadn't talked about this player at all off scene or whatever, but Ezra Thomas from Florida State. Thomas is a really interesting player. He's somebody that I put in my scouting notes last year when I was watching Renardo Green, somebody that I was really high on. He won't even turn 21 years old until the draft, like after the draft takes place. So it's a really young player, still like early on his developmental path. Listed 6'2", 198 pounds. He liked the size. He's also going to be at the Senior Bowl. So we'll talk a lot about like Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl guys here coming up on the channel. But on the season, Florida State was really bad. You guys probably didn't watch a lot of Seminole football this year. I don't blame you. But he had 350 coverage snaps this year. He only gave up 17 catches. He just wasn't tested like really at all. But you watch the film, man, you see a long press corner. He has the speed to carry crossers, carry vertical threats up the boundary. He plays big. He suffocates guys at the catch point, understands how to use the sideline to his advantage. He's pretty clean technically at the line of scrimmage, man. They asked him, they put him out there on an island pretty consistently. and he wins pretty much every rep, man. He was pretty dominant this year. The only thing I'll say is like, he's pretty clean technically, but he is a little bit reliant on like getting his hands on at the line of scrimmage, some two-hand jams. That stuff doesn't really work at the NFL level. Guys are too quick, they're too physical, so that's going to need to be more of a changeup. But the biggest area of improvement I have for him, man, is just like run defense. He's got to take better angles to the ball. He allows some scrambles, some explosive runs in his direction where it's not that he like doesn't want to tackle. Like, he's a bigger dude. He profiles as somebody who should be a good run defender, just not taking good angles, sometimes diving at guys' feet, being a little bit too high in his approach. But this, like, in terms of like cover corner, man, like this dude can really cover. He can really run. I think that this kid is the type of athlete that's going to ascend as we get further along in the process, and people are going to really start talking about Thomas as a name to watch.
So I've had a little bit of limited exposure on Thomas. It was mostly during the summer, like when I was doing some tertiary scouting for SIS for charting. And and the way you described him just now, it sounded a lot like Joey Porter
It
coming out
does.
of college. Because like the tackling is exactly the way you described it with Porter. Because I remember like early on, he was a liability in that area, and then he grew to like be better, like as a like he was more reliable in that area over time. And the grabbiness, obviously, like that's the two-hand jams, that was a huge part about Porter's game. I did not have outside corner technically as like in the top 5. I had it like around that 6 to 7 area because the more I kept looking at the Steelers roster, I was like, I really don't know how to feel about half of the offensive linemen playing for the Steelers right now. And I had like, we both liked Corey Trice coming out of college, but that is a complicated question of how does the coaching staff view him when they put him on an island versus Jamar Chase, and then they make him inactive for the game against Baltimore. So I don't really know what to think of that whole situation with that. So I haven't really seen a lot of Thomas yet, so I got to refrain from commenting on him, but I'm definitely going to keep notes on him when I get to him.
Yeah. The only thing that I'll say, last thing about Thomas is, with a lot of those bigger corners, like you look at guys that are 6'2", 200 pounds, and I do think he's going to be over 6'1". Like he looks tall, long, and lean. But the thing about Thomas that I really like is I don't see any signs of like hip tightness or hip stiffness or anything like that. This dude can flip his hips. He can run. So there's a lot to like with Thomas. I think that, him playing in the situation that he did kind of made people kind of forget about Florida State in general. But I think like once we get into the combine, like when people really start, getting deeper and deeper into this class, I think you're going to start seeing Thomas like show up in some like first round mocks. And I think he's got the talent to kind of ascend to that territory. But yeah, outside corner was my 4th need. I just think the Steelers, I think I like Joey Porter Jr. I'm not, I will acknowledge that there was some bumps in the road this season, as there usually is for young cornerbacks, but I think that finding a partner for him long term is like near the top of my priority list. So yeah. But what was your number 4 need for the Steelers?
So number 4, this is basically assuming that Najee Harris is going to be gone, which is going to happen. It's pretty much sounding like that's going to happen. Obviously, Jaylen Warren is a restricted free agent, but I don't necessarily think he fits like the long-term vision of what they're trying to do with Arthur Smith's like outside zone scheme. And I kind of went way back and forth on this. I was going back and forth between different running backs, and I'm just going to throw out some quick names here. If you have not watched Bishol Tootin from Virginia Tech, please go watch him. He is one of the better outside zone runners. He's one of the most explosive runners in the country. He's got some excellent contact balance for his size. He's someone I absolutely recommend watching. Jarquez Hunter from Auburn, who's going to be at the Senior Bowl, is like probably the most under the radar back right now, which is kind of surprising being at a big school like Auburn and not being really talked about. He'll remind people of Jaylen Warren a good bit with how he pass protects as well. But not the name that most people are kind of like connecting with the Steelers right now is at running back is Caleb Johnson. And I had to kind of think about this one for a little while. I have not been able to come up with a comparison for Caleb Johnson because it's really complicated with his run style. because I've only seen it once, and it was from Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry was this one-cut runner who just outran you and just ran through you. And Caleb Johnson has a bit of that same type of play style, but
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't quite have. It's so weird because Derrick Henry ran a 4.54 at the combine. It makes no sense because he's one of the fastest players I've
Yeah.
ever seen. And Caleb Johnson, like, he's got a very deceptively like long gear to create explosive plays. And I think, you know, Arthur Smith might have visions of like his time with Derrick Henry, and he might see Caleb Johnson as that potential solution. Caleb Johnson, was really impressive as a true freshman for Iowa back in the day. And then he had a really down sophomore year. This year, he bounces back. He's one of the leading rushers in the country. Really shows off his contact balance. Iowa runs so much outside zone. It's actually insane. It's
Yeah.
like he consistently finds the backside cutback lane. Like, he's really patient and pressing and like manipulating that second level to create those creases. And I really like seeing that from a runner of Johnson. He's not like the most like laterally gifted because like his hips are pretty constricted in terms of limiting, how many cuts he can make in succession.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not like the most fluid sinking his hips. But the thing that I've noticed with him, you look at his feet, he's got really nimble feet, and he's able to, like, when he cuts and he redirects, he keeps that speed. Like, he's able to keep
Yep.
that curvy linear movement. And that's something that, like, you don't see a ton from a bigger back. And I really like looking at that in a player like Caleb Johnson. And there's a lot that I like with him as a runner. There are projection issues with him, though, as a pass protector. There is
Sure.
not a lot of like a lot of reps of him just full on just in pass protection. A lot of him chipping and then checking, releasing consistently. There are some questions to his route running. I actually think he's okay at it. Like, what I've seen in his like ability as a check and release guy, like, I think he does a decent job of manipulating at the top of his stem. And I think the hands are actually extremely underrated. I've seen some really good
Oh
like
yeah.
tight hands to be able to make a play and then transition into a runner after the catch. Like, there's something there that I can project. But the pass protection is obviously a question. So it's going to be interesting to see if Caleb Johnson ends up going like first round or second round based off that.
Right.
But he is a big play runner. He is huge. He fits the Steelers scheme like a glove. I could see them, having visions of their Derrick Henry kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Caleb Johnson, I've already done a film room on Caleb on this channel. It's available for all the channel members. So if you guys go, and that link is in the description as well. So if you want to see a film room on Caleb, you can go watch that now or at the end of this video, preferably. But the thing with Caleb that really strikes me like off the film, I didn't have running back as one of my top 5 needs. It was kind of like it was like 5B. And the way I kind of looked at this was like, okay, if the Steelers had to play a game tomorrow, like what would I be comfortable with them like suiting up? And I just think Warren's going to be back, and like assuming that actually happens and he's going to be, brought back at least as a 1-year restricted free agent, I'd be comfortable with him as my running back more than I would be like throwing some of these other guys out there and having them play big snaps. The thing with Johnson though, I do have a comp for him. And I think, the very unique blend of like patience, and you mentioned like the decisiveness as a one cut kind of zone runner. It reminds me a little bit of Arian Foster. And that's like kind of like with that outside zone heavy system that the Texans ran under like Kubiak and, a lot of the old school like Shanahan teams. But there's a lot to like about Caleb. You mentioned like the hands. I mean, not used a ton, like out of the backfield to run like a diverse route tree or anything like that. But you ask the dude to catch the ball away from his hands and he'll do it. And I think that he meets like the threshold for what I want to see there. The pass protection stuff, like you said, it's a limited exposure type of thing. But when I look at the Steelers and knowing that Arthur Smith's probably going to be back, I want to make sure that we get a running back in here that fits the scheme. and that you can really build around. Because something I know mentioned in a video I just did for the channel with Warren, and one of the things to bring him back, you have to pair him with somebody, in my opinion, because he's only had about a half dozen games with more than 12 carries. So it's like he's not going to be a bell cow type of guy. I'm not even really sure if I really want him as like a 1A type of guy. He can be a 1B, and that's kind of my preferred route, is like get somebody in here that's a little more comfortable, a little bit better of a scheme fit to pair with them, especially with Warren being so good in pass protection. You don't necessarily have to rely on a rookie, because sometimes that's what, prohibits those guys from taking the field early on. So, yeah, I like the shout on Caleb for sure. I think, for
like
my
Arian
next
Foster comp.
yeah, for my next need though, at number 3, I ended up going with corner again, but I went kind of the slot corner route, and the reason for that is, man, like this has just been such a black hole for Pittsburgh, like for so long now. I mean, they have really struggled at this position. They brought in like veterans on, basically veteran minimum type of deals, old guys that can't really run. And I look around at the NFL and I see so many of these slot players, some of which are going earlier, some of which who aren't being valued nearly as much as they should, like a Brian Branch. But I look at the impact that like a real difference maker in the slot can, and how it can shift kind of the identity of your defense. And that's kind of what I want for Pittsburgh. Like I don't want to just keep doing like patchwork jobs over this spot. And the guy that I wanted to kind of talk about for them is Jahdae Barron from Texas. He was somebody that I watched just over the past couple of weeks. He really, stood out to me. I watched a lot of Texas live this year, and it seemed like he was always making plays. But he's listed 5'11", 205 pounds, fifth-year senior, I believe. But this dude has a ton of snaps. I mean, he's been a 3-year starter for them. He's going to turn 24 during his rookie season, so that's notable. This was like his first year actually playing on the outside corner spot, and I really think like the ball production this year was excellent. 9 pass breakups, 5 picks. Now, some of those interceptions were a little bit fluky, like off deflections and things like that, but I don't want to like diminish those, but rather just point out that I think this dude like just has a knack for the football in pretty good hands. And, we know that the Steelers really prioritize playmaking on the back end, want to create those turnovers. Every defense does. And I think Barron like is going to be a player that can do that for you. Versatility, I mentioned like a huge calling card. He's played snaps in the slot. He's played snaps of safety in the box. He even plays like downbacker for Texas in some of their packages. So he does a little bit of everything. What I like most about Barron, though, he has a very specific temperament that I like in my DBs, just how he plays. He plays with a chip on his shoulder. The big strengths that I had for him, like competitive toughness, the short area burst to close on the football, and then his ability to consistently locate the ball or like play through the hands at the catch point. And like there's just a lot to like with his game. I think some people ask like if he's going to be able to vault himself into that first round conversation. I think the age thing and just like, certain teams just don't value the nickel or the slot position as much as maybe they should. The Steelers being one of them. But I think long speed is a little bit of a concern I had on the outside. He doesn't necessarily have like the size that you really would like either to kind of overcome that. I just think he's better suited in the slot, and that's perfectly fine with me. He also only plays like when he's outside, he only plays from a half turn, that's just not where the NFL is right now. So I think he'll come off the board on day 2, perhaps goes higher than that if he does like run a really fast 40 in Indy or something like that. But he's a player that I would really like to have on my team. I think a lot of NFL teams are going to feel the same. It's just a matter of like where teams value him positionally and whether they value that specific position early enough to take him. But I think he'll come off the board on day 2, and he's a good player, somebody I think the Steelers would be interested in.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on Jahdae Barron. I've watched a lot of Texas live this year, and Barron's one of those guys that's really impressed me because of how he just consistently is around the ball on underneath plays,
And he'll
screens.
tackle too. He will
Exactly.
tackle.
That's what the Steelers are missing in like a slot corner that they have been lacking since Mike Hilton walked out the door. And I hate that decision to this day, but it is what it is. I also had slot corner at number 3, but I went in a little bit of a different direction. He'll be playing on Monday. He'll be playing actually tonight. We're recording this on Sunday.
Yep.
He'll be playing Monday night and in the national championship game for Notre Dame, and it is Jordan Clark, who is related to Ryan Clark actually, and Jordan is a slot corner for Notre Dame. He's one of the more impressive slot cover guys I've seen. His game against Louisville I thought he was extremely impressive in terms of being able to blow up screens and, make tackles. And that's something I want to see more of from him because
Hmm.
games like USC, he wasn't really involved around the ball. And he was kind of like, I noticed sometimes like he was getting like beat off the initial release, but then he would recover. There's a good amount of like fluidity with his game, short area quickness to be able to get back into phase with a receiver. And that's something that's going to be tested a lot against a guy like Emeka Ibuka, who
Hmm.
really stresses that area of the field. So I'm excited to see that matchup in particular. I don't necessarily know if like Jordan Clark is my number one target for like slot corner right now, but he's a name I wanted to throw out there and get Steelers Nation familiar with. I remember reading a nugget from Jim Nagy back in September that former Steeler Mike Gorskak, I don't think I pronounced that last name right.
I think you actually
He
got it.
actually, and he actually had a pretty high grade on him is what he was talking about, and I was
That's
actually
interesting.
yeah, so the former connection with the Steelers, obviously the Steelers connection of they like bringing in guys that have relations to players that they have had before. So I could see them being interested in Clark. I would keep an eye on him. He's number 1 for Notre Dame. He plays in the slot. Doesn't always Notre Dame plays a good amount of base defense on early downs. You might not see him a lot on early downs, but you will see him on third down. Ohio State plays a lot of like spread a good amount of time because they have the receivers be able to stress a defense like that. So I think you're going to see a good amount of Clark, and I would keep an eye on him.
Yeah, it's a good shout. Speaking of Clark, I think he has an accepted invite to the Shrine Bowl. So if you guys are like looking for guys at the Shrine, there's a lot of good players on that roster. I've been like really focused in on trying to get kind of my eyes on as many like of these all-star guys as I possibly can. But yeah, Clark is someone that I haven't like actually scouted. I watched Xavier Watts, Notre Dame safety. So that's another guy you just keep an eye on, not necessarily for the Steelers specifically, because I don't think they'll be in the market for a true safety, barring some, unforeseen change there. But when I was watching Watts, Clark did jump off the film a couple times for me, just being around the ball. You mentioned like his ability to cover and then come downhill as well. So my number two need for the Steelers, pretty self-explanatory, man. Like they got to get a receiver. I don't like the way that this front office really screwed up the receiver position this past offseason. There's no need to rehash like every single thing happened, but you just can't play a guy like that Jefferson as many snaps as they did and expect to be a top flight offense and where you really need to be to compete in today's NFL. And I think that for me, it's like one of the top priorities this offseason is like figuring out, add more perimeter talent, regardless of what happens with George Pickens, if he stays, if he goes, whatever. They need to make sure that they're putting a significant investment in this position. And one of the guys I want to talk about is also from Texas, Matthew Golden. This was a dude who I've watched live because I've watched a lot of Texas football this year. Hadn't really got into his film up until about a week ago or over the past week. And dude, the film's insane. He transferred from Houston last season. He's listed like 6 foot, 195 pounds. I actually think he's like a little bit smaller than that. So I'm kind of curious on like where he kind of stacks up there. But he finished this season nearly 1,000 yards, 9 touchdown grabs. The best way I can describe Golden's like you watch him play, he's just a smooth operator, man. He could play X, he could play Z, he could play in the slot. That versatility is like honestly one of the reasons I kind of wanted him specifically for the Steelers. He's a really refined route runner, man. A lot to like with the way that he could separate various tempo to get DBs off balance. He could separate at the break point. He gets out of his breaks really efficiently. Zero wasted movement or wasted steps in this dude's game. He tracks the football extremely well. He could catch the football over his shoulder. He could high point the ball. There's some like highlight worthy throws on film of him like going up and like mossing defenders. And like I said, I don't actually think he's 6 foot tall, but like he plays to his size for sure. And I also think like if you've ever watched Quinn Ewers throw a football, like like anything past like the 15-20 yard range is a true adventure. for him. So like you're going to get a lot of experience, a lot of opportunities to show that you can win those contested catch situations. And I think Golden, I think he went like 11 of 18 in contested catch spots this year, but there was some like concentration drops on film. I think most of those came over the middle, but I got to be honest, man, like I came away from his tape really wondering if like there's a scenario or a path where he's going to be the best receiver in this class when it's all said and done at the NFL level. I think it obviously matters where these guys get drafted to, the quarterbacks that they match with, the scheme that they're in. But dude, like he's always open, like literally almost every play he's open, and he just checks so many boxes for what I value as an end receiver. So yeah, Matthew Golden, I think he's getting a lot of draft buzz over the past couple of weeks, and deservedly so. I think he's going to, really shoot up boards. He's one of my guys in this class.
I wouldn't be shocked if Matthew Golden's the top 3 wide receiver in this class. Like just watching him, I have watched so much Texas football, unfortunately, this year. And I say unfortunately because I've had to be subjected to Quinn Ewers as a thrower and his terrible mechanics, his terrible ball placement. But Matthew Golden makes it so worth it because you watch him just be able to locate a football over the wrong shoulder. Like, he's expecting a football on his outside shoulder, and then it's his inside, but he still makes the seamless adjustment, and he keeps the hands tight. That is something I have to stress so often, is you keep the hands tight, and it is much harder to drop a football than it's easier to win those contested scenarios.
Sure.
because you're not trying to catch a football like with wider hands and trying to snap at it with its like high velocity. And that's something I just love about Golden, is just the ball tracking, the way he wins in the air. But I'm going to stay in a similar mode because I've been big on this guy since his freshman season at Akron, and that is Pitt wide receiver Kanate Mumfield. I'm sure plenty of listeners might be familiar with him. They might not be very enthused about this because of like his production over the time at Pitt, but I could just tell you this right now. You think Quinn Ewers is bad? Phil Dracovic and Christian Valier and Nate Yarnell?
Yeah, it's been brutal to watch, man.
It is so bad. I genuinely feel for Pitt fans right now, but like Eli Holstein, like kind of like revitalized a little bit of like of stuff around Pitt football, and Cade Bell brought a lot better of a philosophy in terms of being able to get his playmakers the ball. The thing I have to stress about Mumfield, he is open. He is one of the best separators off the line of scrimmage. He has such a nuanced release package, just going back to his Akron days. The way he mixes up tempo at the top of his routes, the way he'll lull you to sleep with that rocker step and then beat you inside, it is poetry to watch sometimes. And then the way he's able to adjust to the football. This is something I cannot stress enough. Go watch the Boston College game. There is a play. There are 2 plays in particular. There's one on a post route over the middle. Yarnell throws a absolute wobbler right over underneath defender, and then there's a guy over the top, and it's back shoulder. He's going full speed, but he still comes back. He adjusts to it, tight hands, pulls it in, and then there's a play on a corner route. And he's expecting the ball on his outside shoulder, and it was thrown upfield towards a safety, and he still adjusts to it and makes the catch. And I'm just sitting here, and I'm just like, Mumfield is that guy in terms of being able to adjust to the ball in the air, and that's something the Steelers like absolutely need. And obviously, like, we want them to have more of like a blocking type receiver, but there's a lot of questions with like the George Pickens thing. Like, we don't know where that's going, and they might need more of an outside receiver. Something I hated about Pitt's early deployment with Mumfield, they played him so often in the slot that they weren't trusting him to beat man coverage consistently, and that's where he was at his best. There are some questions of his overall like speed in terms of being able to create vertical separation. He might not always be able to get that like last, if he's not winning like just directly off like that release, that double move. Like he runs some insanely like pristine like sluggo routes that you'll see.
Hmm.
And he can create that separation, but he's not always going to have that vertical separation. But he's a ball winner in the air, and that's why I want to see a quarterback who can trust him more. I think Mumfield is someone who's just flying under the radar, and he could just go off at the Senior Bowl. I think he's a
Yeah.
guy that everyone needs to keep their eye on.
Yeah,
Actually,
he's somebody that I'm really looking forward to seeing at the Senior Bowl. Just like you said, the one-on-ones, like a lot, because I mean, those how much those matter, is whatever. But I think, those are really going to be good opportunities for him to show off the release package at the line of scrimmage. Like,
yeah,
I think he's really going to have a chance to impress with that. The last thing
I,
I'll say about, I wanted to like add one more note about Golden, which I forgot to mention, but in the
okay,
playoffs, like Golden's kind of exploded. That's the reason why you're seeing like his name more and more. I feel like over the past couple of weeks, but he had 162 yards against Georgia. Some really, really nice plays in that one. Scramble drill, high point the football. There's a lot of good things on his tape, but I like the Mumfield shout. He would be a guy to me, like, because of how highly I feel like we're both kind of prioritizing addressing the receiver position. He'd be a guy to me, like if they're double dipping. So like
yeah,
maybe if you were to get, maybe they spend a significant resource or premium resource in free agency, or they go out and get like a first or second round receiver, and then they were able to come back and grab him to add more depth and another guy who can actually play on the outside. Because that's one of the things about the roster right now is like they've kind of got like with the Roman Wilson pick last year, I think like him and Calvin Austin are a little bit like overlapping in terms of skill sets
yeah.
and the way that I think that they're going to be best deployed. So finding like guys that can create space for themselves outside and win like one-on-one, especially versus man coverage, is going to be a really big priority for me, like going into the off season. So I think we both have the number one need for the Steelers as the same. The problem
Yeah.
is this is not the time to need one. I mean, the biggest need for the Steelers going into the offseason, man, they got to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback. I mean, I don't think, regardless of what they do with Russ or Justin or any of these like free agents, like it's hard to see like a long-term future with really any of these guys. I mean, perhaps Sam Darnold, but there just doesn't look like a lot of paths for them to significantly improve like what is the most important position in all of sports. So talk to me about who you got as your potential maybe solution at the quarterback position for the Steelers, because I'm all ears. This is a bad quarterback class. So I'm all ears.
So before I get to that, I just need to do a real quick footnote on Mumfield. I saw he accepted the Shrine Game invite. I don't know if he's been invited to the Senior Bowl, so I just wanted to leave that out there. Just keep that in mind. For quarterback, there's not a lot to like put your like to grasp the future with.
Yeah.
There's so much that is just not there in this class, because a lot of guys went back, a lot of like even like potential guys that like you could like be like, oh, he had a down year.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could take the discount on Carson Beck, and then he goes back to school, he goes to Miami instead. So they're gonna need to get creative with how they solve this quarterback situation. I've been thinking of a lot of ways they could kind of do this, and I'll go a little bit outside the box of the draft real quick. They brought Skylar Thompson in to the practice squad. That he's been a guy that was like interesting at Kansas State, but then didn't really get to do much at Miami. They seemed to think he was like the dumbest quarterback possible and limited him to like one read every single time. So maybe there's something there. I don't know. I'm not too optimistic about that. I've also
Right.
thought about like, what if the Eagles decide to, because like remember they traded Kenny Pickett to the
Yep.
Eagles. What if they traded Tanner McKee to the Steelers and made that like a
We're
potential?
desperate.
Yeah, exactly. We're desperate. You gotta think outside the box. You gotta think of like a Matt
For sure.
Hasselbeck back in the day, like when Mike Holmgren brought him over from the Packers to Seattle, and that type of situation. But if they were gonna look in the draft, I've been kind of like just trying to find a guy, and the first guy I found, and it was kind of just like based off how fun I had watching this team. Louisville was so fun to watch this year. Tyler Shuck was actually really impressive, and I couldn't believe it, because this is a dude that has had so many injuries, and he has been in college since Justin Herbert was still in college. He was the backup to Justin Herbert. He has like impressive arm talent. Like he has that elasticity to be able to manipulate his arm angle, throw it around defenders. Like he can get outside the pocket, make some really impressive improvisational plays. I've seen some really good vertical throws like down the field to a guy like Ja'Cory Brooks. He works really well off play action. They run a lot of play action stuff, and obviously Arthur Smith likes to build his offense around play action, and I think Shuck's ability as a vertical thrower could complement that a lot. And you see some decent anticipation with him. He's able to cycle his reads, but I think he gets backside a little too late, and that's something he's got to improve upon. And this is where the bad comes in. He's going to be 26 at the end of the first month of his rookie season.
He's a senior citizen as a rookie.
It's a bit of a Brandon Whedon type of situation there. Not quite as bad, but like, if you're looking for values, like for a guy who could be like potentially like a flyer on day 3, Shuck is probably that one guy that I'm like, all right, screw it. Let's take him. I've seen people talk up Jackson Dart, but there's just so much that needs to like be fixed. Like it not just fixed. It's like there's a lot that
developed.
He's not. Yes, there's a lot he's not doing at the line of scrimmage. There's a lot that's being limited with his reads, and it takes time to fix something like that. And the Steelers don't have that proper mentor to sit pipeline that like the Packers did with Rodgers to Jordan Love. So they got to get creative. So look at Tyler Shuck, maybe Seth Hennigan out of Memphis or something like that. They can't really afford to do a first round quarterback or an early round quarterback in this draft. There's just not that guy, in my opinion.
Yeah, the play that I come back to was you were talking about like the arm angles. Like he's not necessarily a scrambler or somebody like he wants to win from the pocket, but he can get out and extend plays. He made a really nice play against Notre Dame where he was like rolling to his left, like dropped his arm angle down, like do it around somebody over the middle of the field. The thing about Shuck that I really liked was, like kind of what you were saying. Like I saw a lot of drops on film. I saw like kind of some things where receivers were kind of letting him down a little bit. I do think that like from a tools perspective, like he has NFL level tools, and like that's all you're really looking for on like day 3 as far as like getting a shot in the dark. I think the film was really good. He also like didn't take a lot of sacks, so he operated like consistently, like on time in the pocket. I do like that he has experience like working under center. Like that's something that I don't think gets like talked about a lot. Is a lot of these guys in this class, and like guys that we'll talk about like over the next several months, like they've never taken a snap under center. And like Shuck, one of the advantages to him being at different schools and like being in college for so long is like he's been in a lot of different systems. So like I think that this dude could probably be pretty smart too. Like I've never sat down on a whiteboard with him, but he looks like a pretty smart quarterback. The one thing that like he
really did him in, like he just wasn't able to play early
and he did take advantage of his opportunity this year at Louisville. The one thing I will say about Shuck that really bothers me, he is like a habitual offender of like drifting and throwing off his back foot. And like he doesn't have, and some of the quarterbacks like will be able to get away with that in college. You just can't get away with that in the pros. Like his arm is not that talented. And it causes him to just, I think when he plays with a good base and steps into his throws and everything, like the accuracy is really good. Like a lot of like his off target throws were just like the result of his own undoing. So Shuck's a really interesting player. I don't know if you have anything to add, off of that, but
I was just gonna say, like with Shuck, like you mentioned the drops. There's a play against Georgia Tech. This throw had me out of my seat. Like he rolls, he throws it about like maybe like 57 yards. He puts it on like the inside shoulder away from like the safety leverage perfectly to, I believe it was a tight end at that was just running vertically, and it's like right on him. He drops it and I was just like, that's like one of the best. That's like the best throw I have seen from the quarterbacks, and it was dropped, and it's just like, it's unfortunate because this guy's 20. This guy's gonna be 26, and like at the end of the first month of his rookie season. So it's like
Yeah.
that's tough to work with.
So, like I already mentioned, like the quarterback class, I'm just not a huge fan. I acknowledge that the Steelers are going to have to do something. They will probably have to do multiple things, just like they did last offseason. Like my philosophy on quarterbacks is like you got to keep throwing darts until you hit on a guy. Like if you don't have a quarterback, you should be doing everything you can to turn over every single stone to get one. Like it's just that
You need
important.
to get lucky.
Yeah, and like there is a luck element to that for sure. I think the guy that I keep coming back to is somebody like I can't fully quit. Is Alabama quarterback Jalen Milroe. Milroe's a wildly polarizing prospect, but he's 6'2", 225 pounds. He will be at the Senior Bowl, is already confirmed, an invite there. Milroe has the physical tools, I think, that suggest a pretty high ceiling in the NFL. The straight line speed, explosiveness. I mean, this dude's a guy who's probably going to run somewhere around like the 4.4 range. He can go 0 to 60 in a blink of an eye. He forced 32 missed tackles last season. Huge threat in the red zone. Like I think he scored 20 touchdowns with his legs this season. Every quarterback run game concept that you can think of is on the table with this dude. As a passer, he's more accurate than precise, except when throwing the deep ball. Throws a beautiful deep ball, puts a lot of touch on it, consistently hits guys in stride. Jermaine Burton and him had a really good connection 2 years ago. Just over the last 2 years, like you look at the numbers, 42 big time throws on deep passes. Like this is what this dude does. Like he uses his legs as a scrambler, as a runner. He throws the ball vertically down the field. The new offense under Caleb DeBoer, I thought was a good move for him. It did allow him to speed up his process a little bit. It lowered his time to throw, and he took fewer sacks, which was like just a huge problem in 2023. Like he had a 31% pressure to sack ratio. And that was just untenable. This year it was like 17-18%, I think, last time I checked. That's better. Still not where you necessarily want it to be. But Milroe, like I'll obviously acknowledge, like he's still very much a project as a passer. There's a glaring lack of anticipation to his game, which prevents him to consistently throwing over the middle of the field. I just think the general consistency in his game on a down-to-down, game-to-game basis needs to improve. I think guys with these tools typically do tend to go in the first round because, like, he does have a good arm. Like, the athleticism is off the charts. But taking him in that first round, like, without, like, a real concise plan and a very, very friendly ecosystem or environment for him to operate within is just a very risky proposition and something I would really highly suggest teams avoid. But I would love to work with him, though. Like, if I could get him on day 2, I think the upside is very, very real. And, like, you could still do some, like, package type stuff with him early. It just really depends on like how much you trust your coaching staff. And this is like another thing like that I don't have any knowledge of. It's like with quarterbacks, that like it factor gets talked about a lot, but with any players, especially at this position, like you just have to be able to develop yourself, even if you're not getting playing time. And like that comes down to getting to know the person, getting to know the work ethic. I don't have any knowledge or insight into those two things with Milroe, but that would probably be a heavy factor into my evaluation if I was an NFL team. So you have anything to add on Jalen?
Yeah, I was gonna say with Milroe, it was interesting with his early part of his career because when Hurts was a freshman at Alabama, I've kind of like compared the two a little bit because they were really similar their first couple of years, and I think Milroe, he was ahead of Jalen Hurts as a passer. And then, like, if we're comparing Oklahoma Jalen Hurts versus like this version of Jalen Milroe, Milroe's not quite to that level. And from what I've seen, from what I've read, there are some teams that have him graded at running back, and
I've
it's
seen
like
that too.
it's really interesting because like I don't necessarily hate it because he is an impressive runner.
Insane athlete.
He is 6'1", 220 pounds, and he is like probably running a 4.3 in my opinion, just with how often he's able to create explosive plays with his legs. But with Milroe, it's interesting because I watch some of his tape, and like I remember the Vanderbilt game this year. I thought that was one of his most impressive games in terms of being able to layer the ball, into those tighter zone windows. And I just don't think you're going to see that a lot with, Milroe. I think you have to take a lot of the Jalen Hurts approach with him of you need to sit him for a bit. And then as soon as he plays, you need to design an offense that is specifically built around the run game and his legs to the point where it's opening everything else up for your offense. And to do that, you need a sustainable ground game, and you need an offensive line that can pass protect for as long as it does. And that's
Yeah.
one of the things about Jalen Hurts with the Eagles. He's in a very like insulated environment, and
And
it
people do
allows
not I don't think people still people do not realize like how good that environment is and how
it.
like I mean he does in a way like make it go with some of the things that he can do with his legs and like the run game, but his ecosystem is about as good as it's ever going to get. And like one of the things too with like Philly is like you mentioned like the run game, when the quarterback's involved in the run game, it's pretty much impossible to play two deep safeties. So that does
Yes.
open up stuff that you could do down the field because you're going to get single high. But then like you got to have dudes on the outside that can win a one-on-one. Like how many teams have AJ Brown, Devontae Smith who are like pretty much incoverable one-on-one? Then you mentioned the offensive line thing. Like Hurts is in when was Jalen drafted? 2020. He's still
2020.
taking bad sacks, and he plays
Yes.
behind the best offensive line in the NFL. So it's like I do think that there's so much development with Milroe, but I also think like the floor may not be as low as people I think may think it is just because of his athleticism. And I think that sometimes gets washed away as like, you could see the worst moments of Jalen and you can say like, how is this dude even starting at like a place like Alabama? Like there's no way he's an NFL quarterback. And I understand that. But I do think like even as like a spot starter, somebody you can come in and like in the right environment, like run the ball a lot. You can do some different things with him, throw the ball down the field. And gradually try to bring him along. Like I said, I think a lot of it's just going to depend on where he's drafted, what type of plan you have for his development, because he's nowhere close to being able to play. Like if this is the dude you're planning on playing as a rookie, it's not going to work. I would be absolutely stunned if it worked in that scenario. And that's why like I think like if you draft him on day 2 and like you have a plan to sit him for a year and get him in a system and get him under center and see if he can iron out the kinks, I'd be very intrigued to work with the tools. I don't want to spend a first round pick on him, or really don't really love spending a first round pick on anybody in this class, if I'm being honest with you. So.
Yeah, I'm about in that same boat. But one last thing I want to add on Milroe. It's going to be interesting because if you look at it from the Steelers' perspective, doesn't this sound like a lot of like what we're describing with Justin Fields and like
That
the
was my
Russell
comp
Wilson?
for Justin.
Yep.
That was my
Yeah.
comp for Jalen.
Yeah, it's that whole experience of all right, we got the limited middle of the field, so we got to build around the quarterback ground game. You got to focus on the vertical element of the pass game. One thing I'll say about Milroe, he's at least got like more touch on the football than
Mm-hmm.
Fields does. Like Fields throws a bit too much of a fastball, even on vertical plays. So like if you think that might be enough to like say like okay, this is how you build like your quarterback room. We'll compete around these two guys. Like I could see that vision, and I see like the Eagles type of like
Yeah.
blueprint that could be there. But this is also why I wanted the Steelers to play
Yeah.
Fields the entire
It's
season.
it's
So
a
we can figure
very
that out.
it's a very narrow path that you're trying to walk when you're
Yeah.
building around this type of quarterback. But I mean, that's the reality of the NFL. I mean, it's very difficult to find the quarterback, and then building around them is not always easy, especially when you got guys that aren't capable of doing everything. And there's only 6 or 8 of those guys in the NFL that like can do pretty much everything, make everybody else better, operate the entire width and length of the field, and do everything you want them to do as passers. And Jalen's not there yet. I would be intrigued, like I said, to work on the tools. I do like Fields was my comp for him. I don't think he's quite on that level as a prospect, but I do think that there's a path for him to be like a starter in the league if everything does fall perfectly. I would just be curious about like what the Steelers would think of him. Like if Fields is the guy that they go with instead of Russ, and Russ walks, whatever, I don't really necessarily want to see Justin and Jalen in the same quarterback room just because I think that's really repetitive. And I'm just like, wow. Like, but if they did elect to go with Russ, and it's not necessarily what I would do, but if they did end up going with Russ for like 2 or 3 years or whatever, and then, he can be your short-term option, then you could bring in Jalen. And I don't know. Everything we've heard is that Russ has been a great like teammate and everything in Pittsburgh. So I think, having him kind of be that veteran presence for a guy like Jalen could actually like reap some benefits. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. But we definitely went over like where we were expecting to record, but I really hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. Let us know in the comments, obviously, what you guys thought. And obviously, if y'all have any questions or anything like that, we will be back next Monday. Like I said, some of this stuff will kind of be Steelers like intertwined. I'm sure that we'll talk about the All-Star circuit, Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl stuff, get into the combine. I'm sure we'll do some rankings and stuff like that as we get further down the road, talk about some players in a very detailed manner. So I appreciate the continued support, and we will see you guys later. Peace and love.